So the challenge, and what we often hear, especially in Australia, is, can you explain to us the difference between Christian values education on the one hand and recontextualization on the other hand? We don't understand completely the difference between the two. And we do not understand also completely what is meant by Christian values education. And we have prepared this lecture especially to explain that difference because it's so crucial for this context. So the next slide, what Christian values education is not. Well, it does not refer to secular values. Yeah, we are not measuring secular values. For example, the values that are imposed by the Australian government, the National Framework for Values Education in Australian Schools. That's also about values, but these values are in fact secular values. And if you would only have these values in your school, you would become a secular institute, perhaps what is the hope of politicians who create these kinds of things. Yeah. So it's not these secular values we mean by Christian values education. Also, a secularized school has values, and it will be values like the ones that are here. Secondly, we also do not mean, if we measure the factor Christian values education, we do not mean Catholic values in the sense of unique Catholic characteristics or concerns. And sometimes people respond to us saying, but we have values, we have specific Catholic values. Then they refer, for example, to private ethics, where you have the concern of the church around abortion, euthanasia, stem cell research, or contraception. Or in social ethics, Catholic values like charity, promotion of the family, work for the common good, subsidiarity, care for the poor, pursuing of peace. We do not mean with Christian values education these values, because if you promote specifically these Catholic values, you would have a high score on reconfessionalization. So that's what we are not measuring with Christian values education. Yeah? I hope that's clear, because there's a lot of confusion around this. So then, what do we mean with Christian values education? Something else. That's an important slide. In the terminology of the Melbourne scale, Christian values education refers to a method or a strategy, what we sometimes also call monocorrelation. You link directly a human value with a Christian element. Christian values education is aimed at finding a kind of consensus among everybody, Catholics and not Catholics, in the school, whereby you try to harmonize secular and Catholic values. So you look to the greatest common denominator. And you do this in an effort to weaken the tension between Christianity or Catholicism and the world. And you say, but we all love each other. We will not make war here. We all love each other. We are a Catholic school. So you link the universal love with the Catholic identity. So it's a method of linking or correlating a commonly shared sense for moral values with a Catholic religious framework. So, to put it again in other words, it's a combination of commonly shared values and a Catholic frame of interpretation with the intention, the implicit or the explicit intention, to promote a Catholic way of life for all school members. Now, important is that this correlation mostly consists, as we see them, and we'll give examples within a moment, in an external, that's important, an external coupling of two things that in fact are foreign to each other. And then you try to connect them. The problem is that they continue to function, as it were, independently. At the same time, one presupposes that they lie within the same interpretational framework, and so they refer to each other and they evoke each other automatically. I give examples. It sounds, I think, quite theoretical, but it's very concrete. So this Christian values education is, think about the petrol tank of confessionality. As long as you have a big tank of confessionality, of passive traditional confessionality, you will think that automatically if you bring in values, everybody will link them and will recognize them as elements of the Catholic tradition. Yeah? So the passive confessionality is the binding agent of that harmonizing efforts. So that's a very important text to understand what Christian values education means. Somewhat abstract, but we give some examples to show this to you. The first one we have used in Adelaide last time. There's even a bishop who wrote an article on this slide. So what do we see here? You see here on the one hand a confessional statue of Mother Mary, and on the other hand, the teacher in this primary school has been choosing for 3 values that are universal values. Do your best, you know this from the government values, they do your best. Encouraging others and never give up. So you see here, in fact, a kind of link that is made or presupposed between, on the one hand, Catholicism, and on the other hand, human values. Of course, as a theologian, I would question the fact that you can summarize Catholic Mariology with these 3 terms. As if do your best is a summary of what Mary is standing for. Of course, you make a link, and in context of confessionality, it's evident that these 2 things go together. But if students do no longer recognize the statue and the meaning of it, you know what happens? They grow up, they take the values with them, they become excellent moral citizens, playing a big, important role in society, also in Australia, but they leave Mary at school. So the link is an external link. There is no encounter between text and context, as it were. As long as the confessionality of the schools is still there, this can work. The bigger the gap becomes, the more the confessionality gets under pressure, the less evident it is that children will recognize the one in the other. And you run the risk of delinking what is happening. Another example are the tables with, for prayer in Australian Catholic schools, primary schools often. Also here there is a kind of presupposed evidence combination of the human values on the stones on the one hand and the link to the confessional elements of Bible and cross on the other hand. The 2 are brought together in a context in which, spontaneously you would think that the one supports the other. The third is an example of this week. It is a project on ecology, and you see the school connects the drawings of the children about water with the idea of water as a precious gift from God. Traditional linking, correlating of 2 aspects with each other. Also an uncritical linking of the 2 to each other. So that is what we mean by values education. It's not the traditional Catholic values, nor the secular values. It's a method of bringing together 2 things that are strange to each other, but that in a confessional context are put in a kind of evident correlation, hoping that in that way Christianity receives a plausibility. That's what meant with Christian values education. Okay. And you could say this is very nice and it works well, and myself, I'm educated through Christian values education, and in a Catholic family, that's normal, that you connect these two things with each other. The problem is that we see that this gets under pressure, and that's what we also have discovered here in the exit results of 2012. We will only show one graph. We can show masses of graphs, but only this one. In this graph, you see the result of how many? 12,526 respondents in Australian Catholic schools. Let's have a look. Secularization, reconfessionalization, values education, recontextualization. It's on the normative level, so we do not measure confessionality here. Okay, then you see again students grade 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, the parents, the teachers, the school leadership in this order. You see? I start with the good news. Yeah? The good news is that all adults, parents, teachers, and principals want to recontextualize. That means to give a new plausibility in the actual context to the Catholic identity of the school. That's, in fact, a very strong option, which correlates with the post-critical results we have seen in the first lecture. It's because you have a strong PCB that you also want this recontextualization. Also very positive is that the principals are really the identity coaches who even are stronger in wanting that direction than the teachers and the parents who follow with big support. The adults do not want to secularize the school. Have a look. Yeah? And they want to reconfessionalize a little bit, but that's not their main goal. Of course, they have the concern that a tradition is brought in each time again, otherwise there is nothing to recontextualize anymore. Yeah? So it's a combination of these two. What we see is, however, that the adults have also a very high score on values education. Yeah? And what we also see is that, and that's that white line, that also the students like values education. Yeah? All of them likes values education. You see? That's the big compromise at this moment in Australia. That's what we show in the pictures, linking two different things. The Australian culture, linking it with a Catholic understanding of reality. You see? But there's a problem there. Have you seen it already? What do the students further want? Do they want recontextualization? In the primary school a little bit, and it drops. It's still positive. It's not negative. It's above the line. What do they prefer? They prefer values education. Have a look. What do they hate? They hate reconfessionalization, at least in the last years of secondary school. Have a look, the drop of reconfessionalization. You see? And do they want to secularize the school? Have a look. It becomes positive at the end of secondary school. Yeah? So, but values education is a compromise. So what is happening? What do we see happening in our analysis of the Catholic schools in Australia? And that's a challenge for you, I'm well aware. The adults want to that's the intention of the adults. The adults want to recontextualize the school, to reconfessionalize the school. They use values education, and they like to fight against secularization. You see? That's the adult pattern. But what is the effect on the level of the students? That's the effect. The students love values education. Not too much to recontextualize. For sure not to reconfessionalize. But they use values education to secularize. That means that the intention of the adults to use values education to recontextualize is used with joy, by the students to sit back, to relax, and just to secularize, to put it blunt. That's what we see. Yeah? So, that's a difficult message to bring. So, values education is not enough. It has even a secularizing effect. Yeah? Because, the teacher can do its thing with the Christian tradition, but at the end you can just leave this at school. Yeah? And you see then how the kids become relativistic if they enter a secondary school and become ordinary civilians. Huh? Good. So if you summarize this in words, what do we see? The good news, recontextualization of Catholic school identity enjoys majority support from the adults and has also a support, but not such a strong support, by students. Students will not resist recontextualization, for sure not. What they resist strongly is reconfessionalization, especially when they get older. The resistance against secularization is diminishing dramatically among the students as they grow up, turning into a slight average approval in year 11 and 12. Think also about the balance between PCB belief and relativism. Also there you see that change. The enduring monocorrelation by means of Christian values education, or thought intended by adults as a strategy to recontextualize the school, combined with some reconfessionalization, actually has a secularizing effect on the student population. But despite this adverse effect, Australians continue to support Christian values education on the normative level. It allows the students to pass through the Catholic education system, incorporating the values, but leaving Christ behind at school. Yeah, and Jan put there, that's one of his jokes, not to make it only something for Australians, but I compare it sometimes, if I have to explain it in an easy way, with if we eat pizza at home. Yeah, one of my sons don't like pineapple. So if we make pizza Hawaii, you know what he's doing? He picks out all the pineapple and he puts it next to his dish. And then he enjoys his pizza and goes playing and leaves the table. And the pineapple is there. And he had a wonderful meal. Yeah? Catholic education, a child said this week to us, is fun. It's fun. Eating pizza is fun. Even eating pizza Hawaii, but they don't eat the pineapples. Yeah? So you can pick it out. There is no integration between the Christian or the Catholic dimension and the cultural dimension. It are two foreign things that are linked to each other from the outside. So recontextualization will go into a much deeper merging of identity and context, where the dialogue between the two is much more intimate than is the case in values education. So you cannot de-link what has been artificially linked with each other and not recognized because of a lack of existing confessionality. That's why we are pleading for a smooth transformation of values education, not a rejection of values education, but a transformation of values education into recontextualization. So what are the risks of values education? To summarize again, when a school's Catholic confessionality fades away, and this goes slowly, you could also see the process of secularization is a slow process and becomes less and less recognizable, then an unreflective continuation of Christian values education. And you now understand what we mean with Christian values education. That means that monocorrelational strategy in a ever more pluralizing and detraditionalizing cultural context, this Christian values education becomes ineffective. Yeah? That means we start with these experiences in the culture, but it becomes more and more difficult to cross the gap in some way and to reach that Christian narrative, especially if the children get older. The second thing is that this Christian values education as a method becomes predictable. Yeah? At a long term, the students know what will happen. You can tell your story, but the teacher has Jesus in his here. Yeah, you see, Jesus is here, and at the moment I can take out Jesus, I will put Jesus on it. Yeah? It becomes predictable. I have told last time the story of the squirrel. You know the squirrel? That small animal? Squirrel, yeah. Thank you. There was a teacher who would teach religious education in a class, and she had prepared a story on that animal. And she was entering the classroom, and she was saying what was the topic of the class. And there was a small child raising her hand, saying to the teacher, "We don't need to hear that story." And the teacher was surprised because she said, "I have prepared my course, it's a nice story." And she asked the child, "Why can I not tell this story?" And the child answered very honestly, because she said, "At the end of the class, we all know that Jesus will be the squirrel." Yeah. So it becomes predictable. Yeah. And small children cannot resist cognitively. But at the moment they grow up, they start resisting against that monocorrelational strategy, which in fact closes the hermeneutical space. And religion becomes a mechanism, a predictable mechanism, and not a rich, imaginative thing to deal with the complexity of reality. The complexity is always reduced to what is predictable. That's the way also we use often Bible stories. Always in the same way, always listening to the same stories, concluding always with the same moral recepts. It becomes predictable and also, for that reason, counterproductive. Yeah, I have called this the shutter, in one of my articles, the shutter phenomenon. You know what the shutter is? I teach a course in Leuven to 500 students, all students of 22 years old. In their last year, they have to follow at the Catholic University, they have to follow a course in religion. That's not easy. I can tell if it's about, the topic is death, and I start telling about life after death experiences. It's completely silent. They are fascinated. Life after death. A professor, what will he say about life after death experiences? And then I say, as a Christian, resurrection is, and I say resurrection, and I see in that big room all the shutters going down. Yeah? So the correlation changes in an interruption in some way. And it does not work anymore. It works in the beginning, but on the long term, it comes under pressure. And we can see this in the empirical data happening also here in Australia. A strategy of monocorrelation. Oh yeah, just to have a small break. We have an example of another example, and now you will really laugh at us. Oh. The shutter goes down. This cannot be an accident. But the shutter goes up. It should go down. It will take 5 minutes. So to end up that part on Christian values education, so which you can also summarize as what we call monocorrelation, yeah, the direct, exclusive linking of a human and a Christian aspect. We like to show this using a clip from Coca-Cola, as you can see. Jan will explain why we are doing this.
Yes. Yeah, we're going to sneak in another advertisement here. I'm sorry. It's purely coincidental. It's just about... Just a moment.
Once upon a time in a town like this, a little girl made a great big wish. Shake it up, shake up the happiness. Wake it up, wake up the happiness. Come on, yo, it's Christmas time. I know you're out there. I hear your reindeer. I see the snow where your voice happening. Ho, ho, ho. Shake it up, shake up the happiness. Wake it up, wake up the happiness. Come on, it's Christmas time.
A 1-minute commercial for Coca-Cola, very well made. Look closer. What do we see in this commercial? Essentially what we see is that commonly shared Christmas values, such as happiness, gentleness, kindness of heart, togetherness, warm family spirit, love and care, entertainment, having fun, no more loneliness, no more boredom, no more restrictions, and freedom, are being correlated to the consumption of Coca-Cola. It is as if we are being branded by the correlation between these values, virtues, and desires we all share on the one hand, and the joyful consumption of a soft drink on the other, a bond that actually remains purely external. The next time you do your shopping, it is hoped that you spontaneously attach these good feelings to Coca-Cola, with the sole intention of it to increase the likelihood of you buying it. And now it comes.
You have more?
In
Yeah?
Christian values education, the person of Jesus Christ is being linked to the positive feelings and desires we can all share, such as love, compassion, care, goodness, solidarity, openness, responsibility, courage, with the intention that as many students as possible make the jump into religious belief. But does it work? In truth, it works with a minority percentage of the students. But on the long term, most students hold on to the values while letting go of the religious perspective.
Okay, so what we see is that if you show this to teenagers, they will say, wow, what a nice clip. Yeah, they will uncritically accept the correlation. If you show to teenagers a Christian correlation, they will be very critical and they will often resist strongly. It's because they have received an overdoses of this kind of correlational strategy. So we need to learn them also to look in a critical way to these kinds of correlations, because they manipulate, in fact, our desires.